Let's start. Hi everybody, my name is Екатерina Макарова, and today I would like to welcome you to our Youth World Council for Psychotherapy section talk with Professor Alfred Pritz. According to so many international psychotherapists, Professor Pritz is the most successful psychotherapist of our time. Professor Pritz, I would like to welcome you. And let's start with our very first question. I'm asking everybody at our talks, why psychotherapy?
So welcome to you. You mean how I came to psychotherapy?
Right.
Well, I was after high school, and I was looking what attracts me in life. I wanted to do something significant for myself. And when I had my military service, it was very boring, and I looked for something which I could use for later, and so I inscribed psychology, because I thought this I need in any case, because at that time I wanted to become a teacher. And when I started in the second semester, I did a self-experience seminar, and that was the click. And with this self-experience seminar, I knew this is something which interests me deeply. And from that point on, I looked for psychotherapy possibilities. I also, as a student, I was quite depressed, and I looked for a psychotherapist to help me, and it was useful for me. So this was the personal start of psychotherapy. But then I thought this is a professional task for my life. This was the beginning.
Does the academical education in the field of psychology looks the same at your time? That there is a lot of girls, women, and just few boys or men studying psychology?
Presumably, yes. I never thought about that. But already at that time, the academic psychology was not the focus which interested me, really. It was for me too far away from the people, this academic psychology, as it is often still in other studies. And with psychotherapy, I had the feeling that I'm very, very close to existential questions.
What was the first book in the field of psychology or psychotherapy what really impressed you?
Yes, that's fun. That's a good anecdote. It was already during my high school time. I was about 17, and I found a book called The Art of Loving. And I thought and I hoped it's something pornographic, but it wasn't. It was by Erich Fromm. It was a book about the ethics of love. But nevertheless, it was fascinating. So this was the first book. And then I read in the beginning some pieces of Freud's work, especially psychopathology, everyday psychopathology by Freud, which also impressed me very much, and so on. And then many other books.
You are the creator of the World Council for Psychotherapy. I will try to fix my sound afterwards. How you get the idea of creating the World Council?
Well, this is a long story and a short story. The short story is that we had founded the European Association for Psychotherapy in 1991. And when we started to gather the people around of Europe, also people from other continents came and asked for cooperation, and it was clear that something like a world umbrella is necessary for psychotherapy, and so we started in 1995. In Zurich, we founded the World Council for Psychotherapy. But the idea behind is that it is interesting to see what the world soul is all about, and how can we talk about when we don't gather the people which are dealing with it in their entire culture or entire country.
Dear colleagues, I hope you can hear me better now. Do you already have some question for Professor Pritz? Sandra, wait a second. Now, speak up.
Okay. How many countries are the community, the World Council of Psychotherapy, and the Young World Council of Psychotherapy?
Well, at the congresses, there are mostly delegates from 80 to 90 countries worldwide, with an emphasis on mainly four continents. That is Europe, North America, Latin America, Asia, and then Africa. And certainly also from Australia, New Zealand.
Can you remember your very first client or patient?
My first patient.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
And how was you feel about starting your practice as a therapist?
Well, it was, I was in training for client-centered psychotherapy, and she was a very stubborn patient who did not like to talk. So we had many times of just waiting what is coming. And that was not easy for me as a young psychotherapist, I must say. This is what I remember. And I also remember my helplessness when I was a little in despair because she did not open herself a door. And I said to her, please think, what would you like to do now? I will leave the room for a few minutes. Please think about it. And so I did, and when I came back, she said to me, I would like to play cards. And I had no cards in the house, but besides that, I thought I cannot play cards with a patient as a psychotherapist. Nowadays, I would say this was a mistake. I would have played cards with her just to get in touch with her way of thinking. So, and she broke up a few sessions later. So my first patient was a failure.
How was it for you?
Yes, it was not great at all. I thought I have to learn.
How old were you seeing your very first client?
I was 23.
We have a question from Andrea. I saw Professor Pritz has trained in a number of psychotherapists, psychoanalysis, client-centered therapy, and also Gestalt. How comes? When do you practice each one of them?
Yes. At that time, I wanted to know everything about psychotherapy. And so I started to go into different training facilities and training programs to learn as much as I could about psychotherapy. And this was unusual at that time, because at that time one had the feeling of a betrayal when you use another method, or you get to know another method. But it was very useful, because I got an overview and I lost a lot of prejudices. And later on, it's always some kind of a mixture. I remember we asked Carl Rogers, when he was in Vienna, I think it was in 1981, we asked him, what do you think is the best method? And he said, the best method is this one which you create. And in the long run, I had my method is psychoanalysis, but I used a lot of what I experienced before. And I think it is necessary for a psychotherapist to open himself or herself to all kinds of experiences.
If you could start over, what would you done another way? Was hätten Sie anderes gemacht, wenn Sie neu aufmachen können, neu anfangen können?
This is a theoretical question, because life is pushing us in the way we cannot predict. And to say I would have done something differently does not consider the circumstances of the time we had to live.
I know that your wife and also your son are psychotherapists.
Yes.
Is it a good idea to have a partner who is also a psychotherapist?
Well, I chose her not because she was a psychotherapist. And Max, my son, had a free choice to do what he wants. So it is not good or not bad when the beloved ones choose the same. It doesn't make life easier together, but also it is not the point of that it makes it more complicated. One point is good, that we have a same level of understanding when we talk about professional issues, and that is often the case.
you are one of the creators of the Sigmund Freud University, who allows students studying psychotherapy science without and becoming a psychotherapist without studying psychiatry, medicine, or psychology. How did you came to this idea?
This was a very important point for the development of psychotherapy, as Sigmund Freud was already mentioning in his article on lay analysis in 1926, that in the future there will be psychotherapy at the university, psychoanalysis on the university. He was writing, and we had the idea, not because of this article, but we had the idea to try to make an academic program for psychotherapy, because otherwise it could not, psychotherapy could not compete with psychology and medicine and other topics, and would always stay as a so-called second profession. And we wanted to develop psychotherapy as a first profession. And within the psychotherapy frame, there's psychoanalysis, but also other methods like Gestalt, person-centered, etc. At the moment we have at our university 9 schools, and the idea to let the students start after high school was in a way a break of a taboo, because the critics said, how can such a young person become a psychotherapist? You need some life experience. And my argument always was, but you won't ask medical doctors, for instance, to learn before another profession and then study medicine. And Jutta Fiegel, our vice rector and co-founder, made an investigation about the effectiveness of young psychotherapists, and the effectiveness is quite good. So it proved that to start already with 18 or 19 years can be very useful for the person. And Ekaterina, as far as I know, as I remember, you were one of them. And I'm satisfied with the result.
Oh, thank you. At what time I was really the youngest one.
Yes.
And now, after 10 years of more than 10 years of existing of Sigmund Freud University, could you tell us the difference between first professional identification psychotherapist and somebody who already had a kind of another education and having psychotherapy as a second profession? Can you see the difference or tell us the difference?
Yes, the difference are significant, because the students who want to become an academic psychotherapist from the beginning of his studies or her studies on has another motivation than someone who studies another profession and is unhappy with this other profession. And out of this unhappiness is looking for instance, psychotherapy. So this is one aspect. The second aspect is that to start early means that you have time afterwards to develop your own methodology, your own skills, and not like the former procedure start when you are around 30 and then go through the training, and when you are finished you are 40. So this is very late. The best years of developing new projects are used for training and not for creation. And when the young ones, as we have some examples, come, they have more time, more energy to create their own professional psychotherapeutic way.
We have one more question from Andrea. When it comes to finding clients, do you think it's harder for young therapists to find them? As people may think they have less experience and knowledge. What do you think can be advantages of young therapists?
Yes, I was also quite young, and I was going to my supervisor and complaining that I have the fear that people will not come to me because I'm so young. And his answer was, don't worry, after 2 sessions, the patient will not see you as who you are, but as a transference person, and also as an expert. I was at that time very little expert, I must say, but it gave me a little more security to my status as a young psychotherapist.
Alessia has a question. Alessia, can you switch on your microphone so we can hear you? Alessia? Okay, we can still not hear you. Okay, just listening. Yusha, do you have a question for Professor Pritz? Okay, Alessia, start. Okay, then I will ask how kind of our tradition.
Maybe I say something to the former question of how to become more self-confident as a young psychotherapist. I think my experience was that people came as clients or as patients, not because I was young, but was engaged. I was engaged in doing what I wanted to do, and we should not forget to listen to someone is very important. And this listening to someone is maybe a gift or something significant for the patient, and this is not dependent from old or young.
Okay, we got a question from Alessia. Alessia is asking, Alessia is from South Africa, our colleague from South Africa. What is the possible solution for African therapists?
What?
What is a possible solution for African therapists?
In what context? Dear Alessia, hello. Nice to hear from you. Can you formulate it a little more precise? What do you mean? Are you lacking training. Are you mentioning the training possibilities in Africa? They are very few, I must say. There are some in South Africa, for instance, but the training facilities, possibilities, programs are very rare in Africa, I must say. So,
thank you.
I'm happy that Africans from different areas, they did a conference recently in Nigeria and before in Kenya, and we had several WCB projects in Africa, like the World Congress in Durban 4 years ago, and also meetings in Uganda and in Cameroon many years ago. But it is necessary to establish training programs, because when there is not enough training, then it is always lacking concrete experience. And with that, I'm not yet satisfied. It was very similar, by the way, 20 years ago in East Europe, after the breakdown of the Soviet Union. There was a hunger for psychotherapy in Russia, in Ukraine, and in many other countries. And they started to activate themselves and develop a lot of psychotherapy programs. And nowadays, it's a very vivid psychotherapeutic community in East Europe.
Speaking about development of psychotherapy, you are one of the creators of the famous Austrian law for psychotherapy. Would you tell us more how to create a national law in psychotherapy?
Yes. Well, this was a significant experience for myself when we started to develop a law for the profession of psychotherapists in Austria, which was given in the parliament in July 1990. Since then, there is a profession of psychotherapists, and in the meanwhile, there are 11 countries in Europe which have regulated psychotherapy differently, but there is a clear development of psychotherapy as a profession. And for me, it was a move from being a psychotherapist into politics, trying to understand what are the needs of society, and what can be the answer to it. On the one point, and the other point is to develop a profile of psychotherapists, so that the communities can understand what kind of service this is, and how we could make it available. We also fought after the law. In 1991, we fought for the implementation of psychotherapy payment into Social Security, and it ended also in 1991 with a law in Austria that psychotherapy, which is necessary, has to be paid by the Social Security. And since then, it is a growing market for psychotherapists and a growing offer for patients in Austria to look for the help of psychotherapists. And it is interesting that the suicide rate since then went significantly down. So the public discussion of psychosocial health was successful for the people, and also the shame to go into psychotherapy vanishes more and more. And it was fascinating to see the dynamics of politics, and I learned a lot about how the state functions. And that was quite satisfying. And in all countries where psychotherapy is regulated by law, it is an increase of services, and also a quality insurance for the people in the country, that those who are qualified as psychotherapists have a significant training and education that is important for the patient, that he has a so-called a telephone number where he can or she can call. So about that we could speak the whole time, but maybe there are other questions which are as interesting. Yes, Olesya, you are asking about integration of the different modalities and adaptation to Africa as well. Yes, this is very interesting to see that the narcissism of pure methods is vanishing because of the knowledge of the other methods. And we are exercising it here at the university every semester. We do a seminar where the different schools are sitting together and discussing one case from different views of the modalities, so that the students can learn from each other. And I think that is the future. It is necessary to speak one psychotherapeutic language very well, but it is also necessary to be open to get the influence of different schools and integrate it into your activity.
Speaking about suicidal clients, a lot of beginners in the field of psychotherapy are especially afraid of having a client who would talk about their thoughts about killing themselves and go for suicide.
Yes, for a young psychotherapist, it is very hard when a patient commits suicide. But you always must think that we are in a field where this is part of the professional risk. To avoid the guilt when the patient commits suicide, it is good when the suicidal patient is also in psychiatric treatment, so that the psychiatrist also sometimes gives the appropriate medication, and it makes the psychotherapist a little more relaxed. that the patients have suicidal ideas, that is, I would say, normal. Many people have suicidal ideas and never commit suicide. So it is a question of intensity. When it is too intense, there should be involved also a psychiatrist for the young psychiatrist. But it can happen. It happens rarely, fortunately, but it can happen. And in that cases, which I know, there is no guilt on the psychotherapist side, because there are illnesses, especially severe depression, where it can happen. Also with an experienced psychotherapist. And this is, so to say, a sign that we cannot control everything. And we cannot control the ways patients go.
We have a question from Andrea. What types of problems or clients are the most difficult for you to work with? Or it could be also the understand of our traditional question of your personal client from hell.
I must say, I have no type of patients. I have worked with thousands of patients, some more successful, some less successful. Some did not give me any chance to help them. And these are the most sad experiences. When Sigmund Freud was writing about the so-called negative therapeutic reaction. That means you do your best and the patient gets worse and worse. And his explanation is that it is a kind of masochism in the background, which allows the patient not to use the goodies of a psychotherapeutic situation. I remember such patients which had this negative therapeutic reaction, and this is not very good. Not very good memories, I must say.
And what is the best way to deal with your professional frustration?
Well, basically, when you don't have a solution, it is always good to look for a supervisor. Or later on, also colleagues, where you can talk in a professional frame about the cases which are difficult for you.
We have a question from Yusha Ahmadian. Hi, Professor. How could knowing which approach is good for my approach to work with it? How many years after I do psychotherapy I find my approach? The personal style of being a therapist, I guess. Yeah.
I think it is a procedure for every one of us, that we got more and more centered in that what we are as psychotherapists. And this starts from the very beginning. And some elements are integrated very quick, others later. So I could not say it how in years. I just would say you need about 10 years to formulate what you are and where your strongnesses and weaknesses are. But in these 10 years, the most important point is to be enthusiastic about the investigation you take with your clients and patients. This enthusiasm helps you a lot to overcome the insecurities.
What are you enthusiastic for right now? What are your future plans?
Well, just right in these days, we have started to develop a program for group therapy within our university studies, so that every student who leaves the university who wants to learn more about groups has a further possibility at our studies to do also to learn about group psychotherapy, and means group psychotherapy beyond the methods. So basics of group psychotherapy. This is just a current discussion, and we are implementing it in October this year, because students were complaining that they are only trained for individual psychotherapy, and now we have, with this group program, we have then two possibilities for children, specialization for children, and also specialization for group psychotherapy. Besides that, it's I would say a moving experience to deal with psychotherapists from all over the world. In 2 years, 2.5 years, we will have the World Congress in Moscow, and we also started in Vienna for the World Congress after Moscow in 2023, the 10th World Congress in Vienna. So with that, I am involved in many discussions around the globe, which is quite moving.
You was the organizer and creator of the very first World Congress for Psychotherapy. How comes to it, and what makes you believe that you are going to do it? That is going to work out.
Well, we were very enthusiastic about the psychotherapy law, and we thought it is important to bring this idea of a profession psychotherapy, for psychotherapy, a professional psychotherapy, to bring this knowledge to the world. This was one of the reasons of the energy we put in to organize the first World Congress, which was quite funny because there was no communication in the world about it. There were only communication international communications of schools, so psychoanalytics at the schools and other methods at the international schools, but no structure for a global view of psychotherapy. And this was fascinating to move into an area where there's no knowledge. There's a lot of knowledge in concrete, but no knowledge on a global perspective. And fortunately, from the beginning on, 1995, there were already members who founded the World Council for Psychotherapy from Latin America, from US, from Africa, from Europe. And in the meanwhile, it's a global activity. We did this World Congress is not only in Vienna, but also in Beijing, and in Argentina, and in Durban, South Africa, I said already.
Sydney.
And in Paris last year. Pardon?
Australian.
And
Australia.
in Sydney, yes, sure. Yes.
Can you remember some moments when you just couldn't realize that all these things are really happening?
This feeling I have often in my life, that it is unbelievable that these things happened or are happening still. So
what projects makes you? What of your projects right now are giving you that feeling, like it's unbelievable that it's really happening?
Well, for instance, we started to develop at our university to develop medicine and dentistry, and it works. That is a surprise. It is state accredited and it works. But connected with this is that young medical students also have to learn about communication, how to speak with their patients. And our psychotherapy faculty is helping to teach basic psychotherapy elements to medical students. That is fantastic from my point of view. For instance.
We have one more question, and I know that you are just publishing an article. The name of the article is, the title is From Freud to Alexa.
Yes.
So, and here's the question from Dr. Sandra Kühlhofer. What about the increasing digitalism and also measurement of the self and also treatments? What do you think challenges for patients?
Yes.
For psychotherapy also.
Yes. Hello, Sandra. I think this is a big challenge. And yet the computers are not developed who understand human existence. But we are on the way to it. We are just at the beginning of this development. But in small, we have already many positive aspects. For instance, I remember a few years ago, there was a patient from Nepal who had anxiety neurosis and was writing to us. And the next psychotherapist, 2,000 miles away, what can we do? So we asked a Canadian colleague who works with by Skype with patients in the north of Canada, with Eskimos. We asked her to get in contact with the colleague, with the patient in Nepal, and this worked. So I think this is a good example of the use of psychotherapy online. We just have to solve one problem with psychotherapy online, that is the question of confidentiality. So the patient can look up your qualification, and he can prove are you a skilled psychotherapist or not. But on the other hand, your data are not, when you start a dialogue online, you cannot be sure how your data are used by the client, or by the husband of the client, or the wife of the client. So the protection of the data the psychotherapist gives to the patient are not secure. So this is an open topic which prevents online psychotherapy to be more spread out, because the psychotherapist cannot be totally sure that there is no misuse of his data or her data. That is a dilemma. But no doubt, digital world is also taking part of psychotherapy. We just must be aware what happens. Just two weeks ago, there was a case that two people were talking to each other, a wife and husband, and the machine Alexa was listening and taking some words out of this talk, understood it as a command, and was sending it to another person, to a third person. So the misuse of such experiences is great. And this is what we will face in the future. But you see, as we can talk now, that's a great moment, isn't it?
Speaking about our talk, we do have participants from, I don't know where, Nusha, you are coming from? Wait, switch on your microphone. You have to push the button upstairs, so it has to turn green. Okay, you're writing. So we have participants from Iraq, from Mexico, from South Africa, from Germany, from Austria. You're from Iran, from Serbia. So we are very international talking community today.
Yes.
Professor Pritz, you're doing so much. So as I said already, you are the most successful psychotherapist of our time.
Well, in your eyes.
No, I was speaking to colleagues, so it's not in my eyes for sure, but there is also a lot of our people having the same opinion. Do you sometimes have a feeling that you want to give up, or it was just too much? And if yes, what helps you to raise up and keep doing your thing?
I never had the desire to give up. I must say, never. I often was astonished when I saw that colleagues were in a burnout situation. I never was. Especially when there is a lot of stress, I get better. It's funny, but so it is.
What is your secret?
The only problem is I'm not so young anymore. I will become 66 this year, and I see that I feel that the strength is not the strength of an 18-year-old. That is what I have to confess.
What do you wish yourself for the next generation of psychotherapists?
What I wish?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I wish that the young colleagues have the same satisfaction with this profession as I have and had. That is very important. And that makes you, in a way, happy in your profession. I see that there is a question of Andrea asking, what do you think about the idea, recommend your therapist to a friend so that two friends go to the same psychotherapists, individually, of course. Yes, this is a normal way that often groups of colleagues or befriended persons recommend the same psychotherapist. It is inevitable that people get to know each other in some way outside of psychotherapy, and it is not a big problem when it is not a big problem for the psychotherapist who can see the relationships.
Can you give us some suggestions? Like for a young generation?
For the young generation. I think the most important thing is that you are trying to do what fascinates you most. Don't think too much of conventions and regulations and rules, but look what is important for your life and what I would say fascinates you most. That is important, and that makes you satisfied. I was asked recently by a student. I was talking about my current work, and afterwards he said, "But this work doesn't make you happy." And I said, "Yes, this is true. Happy is the wrong word, but this life gives me a sense, a meaning. So gives me a meaning. And this experience, many people describe this also in other areas. I just had recently a talk with a scientist who is in the field of blood research, and he says, blood research is my life. And he's totally fascinated by his work, complicated work,